If I sing well, will you give me a plate of food? The words hung in the air like shattered glass, each syllable cutting through the polished veneer of the Metropolitan Talent Showcase auditorium with brutal honesty. The girl who spoke them stood center stage under the unforgiving spotlight, barefoot on the glossy black floor, her small frame drowning in a faded pink t-shirt that had seen better years, the hem torn and stained with the story of streets that showed no mercy. Her name was Amara, though no one in that cavernous room knew it yet, and her dark eyes held something ancient and weary that no 12-year-old should carry. The silence that followed her question was suffocating. Judge Marcus Wellington, a renowned music producer in his designer suit and $1,000 watch, leaned back in his chair as if physically repelled by the poverty standing before him. Judge Sarah Chin, the pop star turned talent scout, brought her manicured hand to her mouth, her eyes widening. Judge Derek Thompson, the comedian who usually kept things light, suddenly found nothing funny about this moment. Behind them, the audience of 3,000 sat frozen, their phones still recording, their drinks suspended halfway to their lips, their comfortable Saturday evening suddenly invaded by something raw and real. The head producer in the control booth frantically gestured at his team. Keep rolling, this was gold, this was viral content waiting to happen, even if they didn't yet understand what kind of story they were capturing. Amara's stomach twisted with hunger so profound it felt like a living creature gnawing at her from the inside. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, not since she'd found half a sandwich in a dumpster behind the Chinese restaurant on 5th Street. The soles of her feet were cut and bleeding from the 3-mile walk to the auditorium, but she'd made herself ignore the pain because she'd heard the registration woman talking about catering, about food for contestants, about meals provided. She'd stood in line for 6 hours just to get an audition number, watching other kids arrive with their parents, their coaches, their pressed outfits and practiced smiles, while she clutched her number, 247, like it was a lottery ticket to survival. Excuse me? Marcus finally spoke, his voice carrying that particular tone wealthy people use when confronted with discomfort they can't immediately solve or dismiss. Did you just ask us for food? Amara nodded, her throat tight. The cameras zoomed in on her face, capturing every detail, the hollow shadows under her eyes, the way her collarbones pressed against her skin, the small scar above her left eyebrow from when her mother's boyfriend had thrown a bottle 3 years ago, before everything fell completely apart. Yes, sir. I saw the sign-up sheet said contestants get a meal. I can sing. I can sing really well. But I'm hungry and I just need to know, if I do this right, will you give me something to eat? Sarah Chin felt tears prick her eyes and hated herself for it, for the luxury of crying when this child was negotiating for basic sustenance. Sweetheart, of course you'll get food. You don't have to earn it. Let me just... She started to rise, already reaching for her purse. No. Amara's voice was firm, stronger than her fragile frame suggested possible. I need to earn it. I need to show you I deserve it. That's how it works. Nothing is free. Everything costs something. The audience began to murmur, some uncomfortable, some moved, some already typing on their phones. This was going to trend, this was going to be everywhere. Derek Thompson cleared his throat, his comedian's mask slipping to reveal the father of 3 underneath. Kid, what's your name? Amara Johnson. Amara, where are your parents? The girl's jaw tightened, and for a moment, something fierce flashed in those tired eyes. My mama died 14 months ago. Cancer. We didn't have insurance. She worked 3 jobs, but it wasn't enough. When she died, they took our apartment. I've been staying wherever I can. My daddy left when I was 4. I don't have anyone. The words came out clinical, rehearsed, as if she'd had to explain her orphaned existence so many times that it had become a script. But I can sing. My mama used to say I had a gift. She said if I ever got the chance, I should use it. This is my chance. So please, just let me try. Marcus Wellington felt something crack in his chest, some calcified piece of his success-hardened heart. He'd grown up with everything, had never missed a meal in his life, had spent more on his morning coffee than this child probably saw in a week. Okay, Amara, he said quietly, and the microphone barely caught his words. Show us what you've got. Amara closed her eyes. Behind her lids, she saw her mother, Diane Johnson, who had smiled even when she was dying, who had sung gospel songs while cleaning office buildings at night, who had told Amara that her voice was kissed by God himself. She saw the tiny apartment they'd shared, the way Mama would make a game out of their poverty, pretending they were princesses in a tower waiting for their fortune to change. She saw the hospital room where Mama had taken her last breath, her hand in Amara's, whispering, "Baby girl, you sing. You sing like your life depends on it because one day it might." Today was that day. She opened her mouth, and what came out was not the sound of a starving child but the voice of something divine made human. She sang "His Eye is on the Sparrow," the old gospel standard her mother had loved, but she didn't sing it like the church ladies did, all proper and restrained. She sang it like a prayer screamed into the void, like a question hurled at an indifferent universe, like a promise that she would survive even if the world wanted her to disappear. Her voice started low, almost a whisper, then built with a power that seemed impossible from such a small, damaged body. She sang about not understanding why she falls or why shadows come, and every person in that auditorium felt their own shadows, their own falls, their own desperate need to believe that someone, somewhere, was watching over them. The note she hit on, "I sing because I'm happy," cracked something open in the room. Sarah Chin began crying openly, mascara running down her face. Marcus Wellington sat forward, his mouth open, his entire body rigid with shock. Derek Thompson, who had spent 20 years making people laugh to avoid feeling anything real, felt his eyes burning. But it was the audience that transformed. The initial murmurs of discomfort shifted to gasps of awe. People stood without realizing they were standing. Phones that had been recording for social media clout now recorded something else. A moment of pure, unfiltered human triumph. A woman in the third row clutched her husband's arm and sobbed. A teenage boy who'd been scrolling through TikTok dropped his phone entirely. An elderly man, a veteran who hadn't cried since Vietnam, felt tears streaming down his weathered face. Amara sang like she was possessed, like every meal she'd missed, every night she'd slept in doorways, every time she'd been invisible to the passing world was fuel for this fire. Her voice filled every corner of the massive auditorium, reaching the cheap seats in the back where college students had come for cheap entertainment and found something that would change them. The technical crew in the booth stopped checking levels and just listened, some of them crying, all of them knowing they were witnessing something that happened once in a lifetime. When she reached the final verse, her voice soared impossibly high, a note so pure and powerful that it seemed to vibrate in people's bones. She held it until it felt like the whole world was holding its breath with her. Then she brought it down, soft and gentle, ending on a whisper that carried more weight than any scream ever could. "His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me." Silence. Complete, total silence. Then Marcus Wellington stood up. Sarah Chin stood up. Derek Thompson stood up. The audience erupted in a standing ovation that shook the building, a roar of approval and recognition and shame and joy all mixed together. People were screaming, crying, applauding so hard their hands hurt. The ovation went on and on, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes of sustained thunderous approval. Amara stood there, swaying slightly, exhausted, tears running down her face, not quite believing what was happening. She'd sung for a plate of food. She'd sung for survival. But she'd given them something they didn't know they needed. Proof that beauty could rise from suffering, that dignity existed even in desperation, that being broken didn't mean being worthless. Marcus grabbed his microphone with shaking hands. "In 30 years of this business," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I have never, and I mean never, heard anything like that. You didn't just sing that song, Amara. You lived it. You made us live it." He looked at his fellow judges. "This isn't even a competition anymore. She's already won." Sarah wiped her eyes, ruining her makeup entirely and not caring at all. "Amara, baby, I don't even know what to say. You asked if we'd give you food if you sang well." She laughed through her tears. "Honey, you just sang like an angel who fell to earth and remembered heaven. We're going to give you so much more than food." Derek leaned into his microphone, his comedian persona completely gone. "I've got 3 daughters," he said. "And if any of them had half your courage, I'd be the proudest father alive. You walked in here with nothing and you walked out with everything. That's not just talent, kid. That's heroism." The audience was still on their feet, still applauding, and now people were pulling out their wallets, their checkbooks, shouting offers. "I'll sponsor her," someone yelled from the balcony. "I'll pay for her education," shouted another. A woman rushed toward the stage with her jacket, wanting to cover Amara's thin shoulders. Security had to hold people back, not because they were threatening but because hundreds of people suddenly wanted to help, to fix, to give back a fraction of what this child had just given them. Backstage, the other contestants, the polished kids with their stage parents and expensive coaching, watched the monitors in stunned silence. Some felt ashamed of their complaints about their packed schedules and pressure. Others felt inspired. All of them understood they'd just witnessed something that would be talked about for years. Marcus stepped down from the judges' table, breaking protocol entirely, and walked onto the stage. He knelt down to Amara's level, looking directly into her eyes. Amara, I'm going to make you a promise right now on live television in front of all these witnesses. You're never going to be hungry again. You're never going to sleep on the streets again. I have a guest house and it's yours for as long as you need it. I'm going to make sure you're in school. I'm going to make sure you're safe. And when you're ready, we're going to make a record that the whole world needs to hear. Sarah joined him on stage, followed by Derek, and then something beautiful and spontaneous happened. One by one, people from the audience began coming forward, creating a line that stretched through the auditorium. They brought money, business cards, offers of clothes, offers of homes, offers of love. A lawyer offered to handle any legal issues pro bono. A doctor offered free medical care. A counselor specializing in trauma offered therapy. A restaurant owner pressed a voucher for a year of free meals into her hand. Teachers offered tutoring. A boutique owner promised a new wardrobe. Strangers who had walked in as spectators left as family. Amara stood in the center of it all, overwhelmed, tears streaming, her small body shaking with exhaustion and relief and disbelief. A production assistant finally brought her a plate of food, pasta, bread, fruit, dessert, but when she saw it, she started crying harder because it was so much more than she'd hoped for, and it had come with so much more than she'd ever imagined. The live broadcast broke records. Within an hour, clips of her audition had been shared millions of times. #Amara Johnson trended worldwide. News outlets picked up the story. Think pieces were written about poverty, childhood hunger, systemic failure, and the power of art to reveal truth. But more than that, something shifted in the collective consciousness of everyone who watched. They saw what they'd been choosing not to see, the invisible children, the struggling families, the desperate situations happening in the shadows of their comfortable lives. Marcus made good on every promise. Amara moved into his guest house, which was bigger than any place she'd ever lived. Sarah became her mentor and eventually sought legal guardianship, giving Amara the mother figure she'd lost. Derek set up a foundation in her name to help homeless youth. The Metropolitan Talent Showcase donated all proceeds from that episode to childhood hunger programs. But it was Amara herself who became the real hero of the story. She didn't just accept help, she multiplied it. As she healed, as she grew stronger, as she recorded songs that topped charts and won awards, she never forgot where she came from. She spoke at schools, at shelters, at congressional hearings. She used her voice, both literally and figuratively, to advocate for those who had none. She turned her pain into purpose and her suffering into service. Years later, when she accepted her first Grammy, she wore a simple dress and no shoes, standing barefoot on the stage as a reminder. In her acceptance speech, she said, "I once asked for a plate of food in exchange for a song. The world gave me a feast. Now I'm asking the world to do the same for every hungry child, every struggling family, every person who feels invisible. Because we all have something to give and everyone deserves to receive. We're all sparrows and we're all being watched over. Let's watch over each other." The audience erupted in applause, but this time it wasn't just appreciation for a performance. It was recognition of a truth they could no longer ignore. Amara Johnson, the barefoot girl who'd sung for survival, had become the voice of a generation determined to ensure no child ever had to make that bargain again. She'd walked into that auditorium with nothing but hunger and hope, and she'd walked out having fed the souls of millions. That was the real miracle. That was the real transformation. That was the moment when a broken world remembered it could still be beautiful, still be kind, still be saved by the courage of one small girl who dared to ask for what she needed and gave back everything she had.